and Made of Silk and Steel by All Marvel No Get Off My Sheets, Chapter 14. Stay with him, Jess said, moving to follow Stark and the kidnapper Barnes back out of the medbay. Matt turned, obviously still half focused on their son. You want me to stay on the sidelines while people are out there trying to turn Peter into a war machine? No, I want you to stay here with Peter so you aren't distracted in the middle of a fight by every breath he takes, she said impatiently. You're already injured, and you're the one with super senses. Stay with him, keep him alive, and make sure Banner doesn't get any weird ideas, Murdoch. Banner can hear you, the doctor himself said lightly, bringing an IV stand closer to the bed. I'm aware, she bit back. Forgive me if I don't trust a man who willingly subjected himself to radiation. Banner shrugged lightly, as if to indicate fair enough, and Jess found herself huffing, annoyed at being denied a target to expel her rage upon by someone so disgustingly reasonable. Then again, it was probably much easier to be reasonable when it wasn't your child in the hospital bed. Go, Jess, before they reach the Quinjet, Matt said, apparently resigned to accepting logic and reason, no matter how irritating it was. Stay with him, Murdoch, Jessica repeated, and he could hear the small vibration of urgency in her voice. The fear this was not a request for Matt's own safety. It was for her peace of mind, and he nodded, attention focusing more sharply on Peter. Trish, staying or going? She watched her former sister glance longingly at Peter's face for a moment, before Trish's eyes were back on hers. I'm with you, Jess, she said softly, till the end. Jess felt her throat tighten. There was an unfinished conversation that was lingering in the space between them, but Jessica had less than zero interest in having it at the present time and place. Bucky, it's time to leave now, pal. Steve had felt a barbed hook of hope pierce his chest. His friend's eyes had flickered oddly at Trish's words, till the end, but it had left as quickly as it came. Being that Bucky's reply came in Russian, Steve had no idea what he said. A bit helplessly, he said, Natasha, a little help here? Natasha sighed inaudibly. Having read the files on the Winter Soldier, she thought it best to disobey their rules for him whenever possible. And so her question to him was phrased in English, as suspicious as it was. What is your current mission, Soldat? Barnes' answer was prompt but confusing. Return Petya to his mother. Natasha felt the tension of her brows coming together. She pointed at Jones, earning her a startled glare, and said, That is Peter's mother. You know this. The objective has been completed already. Update objective. Protect Peter Parker. This reply was said more with uncertainty, but not less conviction. Jones was giving Barnes an even more intense and startled glare. She didn't need to speak Russian when she could understand Peter Parker just fine. Who gave that assignment to you? She demanded. Barnes didn't answer. He just looked puzzled. Natasha let out a sudden exclamation, almost as a laugh, but without any humor or joy. Steve's eyes darted from her to Bucky. What's wrong? He's thinking for himself, Natasha realized with a small shake of her head, letting her mouth curve upwards into a small smile for Steve's reassurance. I doubt he even understands it, but he's already making decisions for himself, and apparently he's decided that he is Peter Parker's bodyguard. Jones's face twisted into a grimace of disgust, and Murdoch's head cocked, his expression skeptical. That man is his kidnapper. Yup, Natasha agreed cheerfully, cutting off whatever hand-wringing fit Steve was about to have. And your son has so thoroughly snake-charmed him that the Winter Soldier broke through 70 years of torture and conditioning to disobey the orders of his current master. Both of Peter's parents had a very similar calculating set to their eyes and jawlines. It was funny, Natasha thought. If she hadn't seen the records detailing their heritage herself, the way Murdoch and Jones looked and behaved with each other. She might have guessed they were brother and sister rather than colleagues and friends, despite sharing a child. "You said that was a test," Murdoch said finally. "They wanted Peter to become his new handler?" "Theoretically, yes. We think that's what they wanted," she said mildly. "What they don't want Barnes to do is think for himself. They don't value him for his independence or his brain. They value his skills and his dedication." More softly, she said, "His loyalty is so valuable. In fact, that in order to make him obedient, they had to delete everything he was before. Congratulations, Peter is now the favorite of the Winter Soldier, and I can guarantee that Barnes will drop dead before he lets them take that child." "Yeah, but I could say the same about Nelson and Paige," Jones said, looking unimpressed. "And I don't have to worry about them slitting his throat on a bad day." Murdoch made a noise of agreement just before the sound turned into alarm. "Incoming company, Jess," Jones sighed loudly, looking put upon, before marching straight out to meet the next wave headed for them without even checking to see if the Avengers were behind her. The footfalls directly behind her were Trish. She knew it without even looking. Jess wasn't sure if the people coming after their little messed up family just didn't realize that the actual Avengers were with them, or if they were so insanely overconfident that they just didn't care. But whoever they were sending what may as well be an entire army to retrieve her and Matt with Peter. It was equally clear that the Avengers understood how urgently these people wanted Peter and both parents. What did Stark call Peter's existence? Splitting the atom? The situation was grim, and despite their assistance, Jess knew it. On the roof overhead, there was a high-pitched scream, and then Steve and Tony stared, open-mouthed, as the actual legs of an actual human person, without any other part of that person, it should be noted, thumped to the ground in front of them from several stories up. Three shapes stood silhouetted against the skyline as the whole group, as one, looked up. Jessica grinned. Stark screeched, Who the ever-loving is that, and why is she allowed to just dissect people with a sword?" "That," said Jessica, mouth quirked upward slightly. Logically, she knew that they were probably not as powerful as the Avengers. Emotionally, she was tremendously relieved by their presence. There was no one else she wanted by her side in the fight, save maybe Murdoch himself. "Is the cavalry." We're the cavalry," he squawked, outraged. "No, we're the noisy neighbors," Natasha said. "Friends of yours, I assume." "I think that's Luke Cage, right?" Clint said, squinting upward at the fight taking place on the roof. The setting sun made it hard, even for his eyes, to see through the glare, sunglasses or not. "Y'all know Luke Cage?" "No, love, occasionally attempt homicide," she said dryly. "As victims or as accomplices?" Stark asked, eyeing her sidelong. "Pretty sure as my attorney Murdoch would tell me to plead the fifth on that," Jess replied, utterly deadpan. "You fucked your lawyer." Clint sounded impressed rather than judgmental. "Was he any good?" "I fucked a law student, not a lawyer," she corrected, and then elected to nope herself right out of that conversation. Behind her, Stark screamed, They never said the bitch can fly." For good measure, she made sure to flip him the bird her back as she landed on the roof. And straight into Danny ran, knocking a guy out so that he could give her a bear hug. "Jess," he said, far too happily. More seriously, he said, "Ward helped me find you guys on local cameras, but Peter looked like he might be in trouble, so I decided to hurry your way." "You've made some friends," Luke observed, jerking his thumb toward the flabbergasted Avengers below and decking another dude dressed up in tactical gear, "and enemies." "Don't worry, you guys are always the #1 enemies in my heart," Jess snarked, exchanging wry grins with Colleen. "Aw, Jess, that's sweet," Danny said, as though she had said something incredibly touching, because the monks had clearly socialized this man incorrectly. Really, Danny just knew a tsundere when he met one. "What exactly are you hoping to do for him?" Murdoch asked after Bruce had finished setting up the IV stand. Most of his focus seemed to be on Peter, but he was also very tense, separate from his child being unconscious in the bed. It was easy to tell that Barnes was making Murdoch extra edgy. To his calm, unflappable way, Bruce replied, "The files Tony and Natasha found about you guys say that he has an accelerated healing factor. That all three of you do, really, but Peter's is especially strong." He hooked a bag of fluid to the sand. "I'm hoping that if I can give him some much-needed nutrients and get him hydrated again, his body will have the resources to heal itself without any intervention from me. Steve has a strong factor as well, so we know from experience that it can make internal surgery distressing for everyone involved. We want to avoid that if at all possible, and trust that Peter's body will know how to make itself whole again." Distressing, Murdoch repeated, unable to stop his brows from rising. Bruce nodded, saying, "Surgery on someone with a particularly strong factor is traumatic for both the surgical team and the patient. Anesthetics or numbing agents can be difficult to calculate properly, even for the most experienced specialists, and the body in question will begin healing any incisions made very quickly. In the future, I wouldn't recommend allowing any doctor to do surgical procedures on Peter unless you believe that not allowing it could end his life." He was properly horrified by that. "We can't give him anything for the pain?" Bruce grimaced. "If he's anything like Steve, his metabolism is so high that giving him any opiate or narcotic would be like trying to pour a bucket of water into a lake. I can promise that your son will never have a drinking problem because the alcohol would have to be injected straight into his bloodstream to have even the smallest effect." Sensing how distressing this information was, Bruce did offer one piece of relatively good news. In fairness to his body's resistance, Peter probably doesn't feel pain quite as intensely as most people do. Murdoch said with soft intensity, "He's my son. It doesn't matter how high his pain threshold is." His knuckles were white on the railing of the bed. "He does feel pain." Abruptly, Murdoch straightened into a stance, somehow even more rigid than before, pushing away toward the cockpit partition. Bruce heard Murdoch grunt and then something heavy thumping to the floor before he reappeared. This time was a syringe capped by a very large needle gingerly held out. "Dr. Banner, please get rid of this," he said politely. Bruce stood there, mouth open for a moment, before he responded faintly, "Yes, of course." "They really did not need us," Steve said wryly, amused, observing as Jones picked up a man with each hand and spun, tossing them across the roof like a throw pillow. "Isn't it great?" Clint gushed gleefully as they all arched their necks to follow the trajectory of both men over all four of their heads. He practically giggled like a schoolgirl as Luke Cage shrugged off an entire squad of them like he was swatting at flies. "Did you just giggle?" Tony demanded. "Do you have a man crush on the hero of Harlem?" "Don't you?" he countered, gesturing at the spectacle before them. "Yes," Natasha said, completely unabashed in her appreciation as her male co-workers turned to stare at her. Then her brows raised. "Huh?" Their attention almost immediately went back to the fight happening on the rooftop. Steve murmured, "What the hell?" "Your new friends are pretty rude," Luke commented, kicking a man sideways as he saw Trish struggle slightly with the sheer numbers thrown at them. "What's with the military gear?" "No idea," Jess said shortly. "They want all of us, including Peter." Colleen frowned. To her displeasure, most of them were now staying far away from her ever since they realized that she could and would decapitate them. "All of you?" It's a long story, but they want Peter and they want me and Murdoch too. Even Jess was becoming breathless. They've got the news that he comes with accessories, I guess. Hey Rand, let me get a little crowd control here. Danny threw his opponent over his shoulder before glancing over at Luke. Feeling steady? Steady and ready. Quickly and with a squawk of surprise from Trish, Jess grabbed her and Colleen by the back of their shirts, sprinted to the edge and leaped down from the roof just as Danny's fist glowed with bold yellow fire and met Luke square in the chest. Even just a few feet from the ground, Jess felt the impact of the resulting shockwave stumbling on her, landing slightly, though she, Colleen, and Trish stayed on their feet to meet the surprised stares of the Avengers. Hi, she said, somewhat smugly. Have a nice nap down here? She stumbled again as she was struck with something in the arm, pulling the object out quickly to examine the small dart fletched with something black. The Jess said, croaking as she felt her own heart suddenly and painfully begin to slow down. What they give me? Shit, Barton swore, pulling a compound bow from his back and knocking an arrow. Cap, we got snipers. Take care of it, Tony. Bring Jones into the med bay and stay there with her and Murdoch, Steve said grimly, and whatever happens, do not allow Peter or either of his parents to be captured. Jess, Trish cried, horrified as her sister tried to walk forward and abruptly hit the ground as her knees folded beneath her. Trish caught her before Jess could eat gravel, her eyes dark and glassy. She whispered encouragements under her breath as Jess attempted to get her feet under her again, one hand clutching Trish's shirt in a white knuckle grip that should have torn the fabric, but she could feel the tremble in Jess' muscles. This shit hits harder than JD, Jess slurred, staring at Trish through her blurry vision. Trish clutched her sister closer, watching as Barton shot the sniper. Though more and more black-clad figures were gathering on the rooftops around them. To collect Jessica, she realized, swallowing down her nausea and panic. Banner looked up at the not distant enough rumble that came from outside, apparently loud enough that even someone without Matt's senses could hear it. He couldn't see his expression, but his voice sounded quite alarmed. What was that? Luke and Danny are here, he answered pleasantly, knowing that wouldn't explain anything at all, but Matt wasn't in the best of moods. He had finally gotten used to Barnes being there. His presence unnerved Matt, though he wouldn't like to say so out loud. His breathing and heartbeat were too regular, almost mechanical, and to someone like him who could hear it, that was incredibly creepy in another human being. He smelled like steel and motor oil and human sweat and the coppery tang of blood, like something between his dad's boxing matches and an auto shop. He didn't like it. It set Matt's teeth on edge and gave him the urge to throw a counterpunch. His heartbeat is stronger, Matt said, relieved. He reached out to Peter, bypassing his blood-caked shirt to run his hand through the dirty strands of his hair. Each breath passed through him stronger and steadier than the last. Good, Banner said warmly, checking the fluid levels in the IV drip. I thought he might need an oxygen mask too, but it looks like that what he needed most was a little food and rest. He hasn't had another seizure, so that's more good news. In the bed, Peter made a small noise and smacked his lips together, whining slightly. Fondly, Matt rubbed at his scalp. Still trying to talk to me even now, huh, Pete? He whispered. It's all right, baby, just sleep. It was a little thing, but Matt could hear the gentle shift of Peter's head, turning in his direction as though he could sense his father's presence. Humming quietly, he continued to massage at Peter's scalp with his fingernails for a moment. Matt felt another person enter into his immediate attention, like the woman who had broken into the cockpit and gently removed his hands from Peter to push away from the bed. Barnes moved before he could do much more than that. Jesus, how did a man that large move so fast? And Matt tensed, weary of a trap as Barnes met the incoming intruder by the entrance. There was a crash, loud enough to again alert Banner to the noise. What? The vibrations of a body hitting the floor, the whine of gears from Barnes' metal arm, and then Matt heard several distinctive wet thumps in the main entrance around the corner. You really don't want to know, he assured Banner, and then stiffened as one distinct and familiar heartbeat from dozens seemed to fade, and then he snuffed out, Jessica? Many things happened in quick succession. Just then, most of them very bad. 1. Matt rushed out of the Quinjet. All of his senses told him that Jessica was on the edge of dying, heartbeat growing fainter and fainter, breathing slow into the weakest exhales of air. And if Jess was going to die, then he wanted to be there to feel the death in her body, to tell their son that he held her and said goodbye to him, said goodbye for him, to say goodbye to the woman who'd had his child and loved that child just as much as he did, who'd been his partner in parenthood and in violence, and for all her complaints and sarcasm, might be the steadiest person in his life since he met Foggy Nelson. 2. Both the Avengers and the Defenders, having been alerted by Trish that their enemies had executed this targeted attack to prepare Jessica for capture, had circled the sisters to prevent any possible approach. 3. Bruce followed Matt, concerned about his willingness to depart from his son's side. 4. Amidst the battle that raged in the circle of rubble and dirt of the abandoned warehouses, Matt heard a man 3 rooftops over say, "We have visual confirmation of the father as well, sir." 5. Multiple agents dropped small silver balls about the same size as a golf ball onto the ground near the group surrounding Jess and Trish. 6. Luke caught and crushed one of them without realizing that there were three more behind and to the side of him. 7. Matt heard the mechanisms in the devices activate just before they went off, and he let out a howl of the purest, deepest agony he'd ever felt in his whole freaking life, because they were not regular bombs. They were sonic detonation devices, and they were non-lethal, but they caused devastating damage to the ears of every person in the vicinity, especially to Matt. 8. Every person in range to the device's detonation was either unconscious with the force of the blast, or in Luke's case, only partially conscious and vomiting into the dirt from the pain of having his eardrums nearly shattered. 9. The surviving commanding officer told the team on standby to set their tasers to lethal and issued the order to make the retrieval. 10. Peter opened his eyes. End of chapter.